Well, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending upon where you are. I have a special guest today. His name is Robert Jardine, and I am very pleased to have you, Robert. Thank you for coming on my show.
Thank you for having me, Kathleen. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
Mhm.
Robert comes from the Highlands of Scotland, and I first heard him on Richard Vobe's channel, and it was just such a remarkably refreshing presentation on German new medicine that I had to contact Robert and ask if he would be willing to take this message even further beyond the boundaries of that platform onto my YouTube channel. So I want to talk just a little bit about Robert, and Robert, you can fill in as
Mhm.
well. But he came to this holistic medicine after a serious injury, and and as a therapist today, he uses kinesiology and hypnotherapy to help his clients heal from the diseases that have situated in their bodies. And this is based upon the concept of Dr. Ryke Geerd Hamer, who was born in 1935 in Germany and had a very successful practice, not only in the hospitals, but also in the universities where he taught. When he came upon his understanding of healing and crises, um, he was quite literally disbarred, delicensed, and he spent time in prison and ultimately and harassed through his career because he spoke about concepts that were potentially conflicting with the mainstream narrative. So Robert's going to talk to us today about German New Medicine and his practice. And Robert, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm talking from the Highlands of Scotland at the north of Scotland, right at the top. Uh, the land goes about another 3 miles further north than where I'm sitting right now, and then you're in the North Sea. So I'm very much at the top of Scotland. Uh, It's a lovely place. Living here with my wife and my lovely 4 and 3/4 year old Torment, who's hope's not going to do too much damage to this interview, but if he does, well, that's part of it, I suppose. Yeah, and I want to bring a message, information, and a message of hope and empowerment to everyone who hears this tonight and who's got an interest in their well-being and or the well-being of the people that they love and care for. So really it's the overall picture that I hope to give is one of huge hope and huge empowerment for people to be much, much more in charge and understanding of their well-being, uh, whatever symptom might be presenting or tormenting their lives. To understand it gives us, it's the first step to overcoming it. And you can't, without understanding, you're lost. And with understanding, you can be proactive. So it's that's what I hope to do tonight.
Very fine. It's all yours.
Okay, well, so I'm talking about the work of Dr. Ryke Geerd Hamer, who back well in 1978, well, by that time he was a fully qualified doctor, an internist doctor. He'd also made some marvelous inventions that helped medical the medical processes. He'd invented the world's sharpest scalpel, and he'd invented various other things. I'm not aware of them all. Another one was an amazing therapy bed that would adjust itself to whatever shape a person was put on it. It would fit them perfectly, and they would be stably supported. So he's a really clever guy, and he was working as a a doctor of internal medicine in 78, and he received some shocking news, traumatic news, that his son had been very, very seriously wounded in some shooting incident. I was going to say accident. I'm not sure what it was. It was involved some royalty from Italy unleashing a weapon, a gun or a rifle of some description near a harbor, and just shooting randomly at things. And one of the boats, where the bullet had penetrated the yacht, had penetrated Dr. Hamer's son was sleeping, and the bullet penetrated through the yacht and through his son, and wounded him critically, critically wounded him. So this was the news that Dr. Hamer got in 1978. I think it was about August or sometime like that. Obviously, he dropped everything to go to where his son was, and after many efforts to save his son died in his arms in December, I think it was, in 1978. So you can imagine how that felt, right? I mean, there's just no words that could describe how deeply devastating that must have been for Dr. Hamer. Within months after that, he had developed testicular cancer, and he did exactly what everyone would do who had been guided by the medical advice that existed at that time, was he had it amputated. He got that testicle taken off, and he survived that. But it formed the idea in his mind that his trauma had caused his cancer. So he wanted to test that. So he took a job as in a cancer research university, so in Munich, which was primarily working with ladies with gynecological cancers of a particularly, like severe type of cancers, where the ladies had that were in question, they had cancers that were so severe that the 5-year survival rate was under 10% that they would expect from these ladies. So anyway, he in his work, he interviewed all of his patients, and without exception, he also discovered that they had all suffered a trauma prior to the onset of their cancer. So yeah, he was right. He thought he was right, and it did seem to show he was right, that a trauma seems to cause cancer. So he then thought, well, okay, so trauma processed in the brain, let's have a look at the brain. So he used CT technology, which was available at that time, and he x-rayed the brains of all of his patients. And on comparing these brain scans, he could see that every lady that had a particular type of cancer would always have a lesion in the brain in the exact same place as every other lady that had that cancer. And he also realized that they'd all suffered the same emotional type of conflict. So he was able then to form a system of knowing that you had an emotional conflict, you had a lesion in the brain, and then you had the development of the cancer in the body, and it was 100%. It was 100% repeatable with every person. So the next sort of thing his discovery was, okay, so let's try and resolve or do something to resolve the conflict which seemed to have caused the brain and the cancer. So he on every lady that he was able to resolve the emotional conflict which had been caused prior to the onset of the cancer. So with every lady he resolved it, both the image in the brain changed overnight, completely changed, and the cancer completely changed, and most of them went into remission. And he also discovered that the body uses bacteria and fungi to do the healing work. When these emotionally driven diseases go into resolution, the body uses natural biological organisms in the form of bacteria and all fungi that can be found in the human body are all used by the body, and they're used in the healing process. So quite amazing, really, isn't it, Kathleen? To make those discoveries, absolutely amazing to see at that time, early on in the 80s, it was very focused around cancer. But since then, I think his work really got completed around about 2010. I think it was all done. Um, his work was able to cover every disease that we consider a disease that's out with physical injury or poisoning or severe malnutrition. Out with those three things, everything else is objectively proven to be caused by a trauma which causes a brain lesion, or put it a better way, it causes a section of the brain to change in a physical way, which is visible on a CT, and the tissue which is controlled by that part of the brain changes and starts to a type of adaptive process. So incredible. And I think his final discovery was what's called the fifth biological law, which was that what we think of as disease is really the body biologically trying to help us overcome the trauma which set it off in the first place. And therefore, it's not a disease. Okay, it may seem, if you just take one snapshot of some of the symptoms involved with this process, you might think, oh, I've got toothache, or I've got herpes, or I've got tinnitus, for example, right? That's a disease. But when you understand it within the context of the whole biological system, that it's all working together and the reasons why, what's triggered it off, you realize that it's not a disease. It's actually a biological attempt to help us in some way, which many hundreds of thousands of generations ago would have been the perfect right way to help us as we lived then and what we were then. Okay. So so that was his contribution to medicine. Fortunately, the medical industry didn't like it at all. They very much went against it. And he took the University of Tübingen to court to force them to test his hypotheses of the causation of the cancers that he had submitted in 1981. He took them to court and he won that case, right? He won the case, and there was a court order put on the university to disprove or prove, whether his hypothesis stood or not. Of course, they didn't like that at all because it was obviously true. It doesn't take any great medical degrees to understand what I've said, and you can objectively prove it to be true. So I think in 2006, the forces that be had the law in Europe changed to allow universities to refuse to test that thesis. So, and that's unique in the history of medicine. That's unique. That's the only time that's been done.
What exactly did that, excuse me, Robert, exactly did that mean? It was the first time that it was done. What, they reversed the ruling, or?
Yeah, that's right. The up until 2006, I could be wrong with the date, but it's of that era. That there was a legal imperative put on that universities to test a thesis. You know what I mean? They're there to do this. That's what they are formed for. That's their purpose in the scientific process. And there was I mean, Dr. Hamer placed a legal obligation on that university with his court case to test his thesis. Um, uh, and therefore the laws had to be changed to allow them to wriggle out of having to do that. And that's the first time that they'd done that. That's the law. No, they'd never. No hypothesis really had put the medical industry into so much danger until Dr. Hamer, made his discoveries and has um, scientifically and objectively disproven medicine 100%.
Pretty remarkable, and how few people actually even today know about German new medicine and Dr. Hamer's discoveries. So that makes this even more important. Every word that
Mhm.
you're saying. So please continue.
Yeah, it does, and it, it really becomes understandable when if we can appreciate both the economic value in disease and also the sort of social control element of disease. As long as disease continues to be believed, then if you can control that process, then you're in a very, very powerful position, both economically and also, how through the legal systems and through governments and such. So there's a huge sort of like um, massive it's a word structure that controls society, all based on these basic beliefs of infectivity and diseases and such. And there's a lot resting on it. And of course, obviously, Dr. Hammer has shown that none of it's true whatsoever, um, and that it can be proven to be false in every single symptom in every case if you start to include the brain in the equation of the disease. So if you think you might catch a cold sore because you kiss somebody who had the herpes virus, then if he's disproven that because there's a brain relay which shows that person has suffered a separation conflict in that particular brain relay which controls the skin on your lips. And if you resolve that conflict, then the cold sores go away and they don't come back. So it's so fundamentally, it's so true, it's so beautiful. It's just so complete and perfect. I mean, there may well be more conflicts to discover, but and there may be some more details which maybe will over the course of time, if when the German new medicine becomes accepted and studied more, there may be more still pages still undiscovered yet. But I mean, Dr. Hammer has given to us 5 biological laws which um, describe the how our bodies and the bodies of our pets and or animals, if we're a farmer or something, or any animal in nature, uh, really, how the body reacts and why it creates symptoms. And I suppose the best part of it for us is, well, the understanding then allows us to do something, to be actually proactive in healing ourselves or avoiding getting diseases. So it's hugely empowering.
Well, and Robert, also, I mean, if we look historically, was it Rockefeller opened the first um, hospital, university,
Mm,
I think it was in the somewhere around 1895, which was the beginning of pharmacology,
mhm,
and then the whole closing down of natural medicine universities
mhm,
that where many women went, for example, and those were almost uh, annihilated completely. And it always seemed to me, from what I gleaned, that it was an economic attack. So that because there was so much power in homeopathy and there was so much power in herbs and all the healing medicines. So to take over with allopathic medicine and their model and the germ theory. in contrast to the terrain theory. Um, and it just really forced everyone into this concept that science, for the first time, it really knew better than our ancestors and all the old ways. Um, so we have around 10 more minutes in this first part of our interview. So
Okay.
please continue.
Well, I completely agree with you. I, from what you said, it's made me realize that possibly the one reason why Rockefeller was so successful in usurping the terrain theory is that they're not, neither of them are correct, in as much as um, disease is caused by a physiological adaptive process triggered by an emotional trauma. And that's not really covered in the terrain theory or the germ theory. So if you, as long as you can keep the germ theory and the terrain theory, you know, that conversation going, and then you can um, convince enough people that into believing in the science theory, then you've got a winner. But of course, when Dr. Hammer came along and said, "Well, no, look, there's the proof there. I mean, that there's objective proof, and I want you to try and disprove it," and they couldn't because it's true, and it's very easily proven with every case and with every symptom of every case. Then, of course, well, that things got really sweaty for the I call it the disease industry. I shouldn't really, but I think it really is an industry based on disease, right? So consequently, poor Dr. Hammer, he was told, if I in 1908, early 1980s, he was forced with the ultimatum of either retract his hypotheses and denounce what he'd basically discovered and adhere to the accepted methods of medicine, or you lose your medical license. And of course, he couldn't retract the truth because he was a true scientist. The truth is the truth. So therefore, he lost his medical license, and that was just the start of his torturous life. I can assure you. I actually knew him slightly. I spoke to
Wow.
him.
Wow.
I used to phone him up when he was in Norway. Um, I was trying to find somebody. I had a friend who could speak beautiful English, and she was German. So I was trying to introduce the two of them. So I held these phone call meetings with Dr. Hammer and my friend Janine. And they obviously would babble on in German. I wouldn't understand a thing about it. But anyway, that's how I knew him. Not really knew him, but I had spoken with him a number of times, and I was trying to help the guy. 'Cause I'm just so I it's still the most important thing that I know in life. Do you know what I mean? It's just so incredibly important that people know this, especially in these strange times when we do need to sort ourselves out as a society. We do need to get priorities and get some truth so that we know who's telling lies and who's not telling the truth and who's telling the truth.
Well, and that makes me think of the fact that we've been so programmed to
Hmm.
always think that something or someone external to our own self is the one that is the specialist, the one that has the answers. And German New Medicine is just the antithesis of that because it is the body's capacity to heal. And as a practitioner of German New Medicine, you facilitate that healing for your clients, which is just absolutely beautiful. And the empowerment that must come from that, not just on a physical, emotional level, but on a spiritual level. So you bring a gift to people, and this message must go out far and widely. There's one thing that I know you'll be talking about it, but when I first was introduced to this German New Medicine, And when I first heard the words that, of course, we can control our own self, right? And in fact, that's our responsibility. But when these assaults happen to us, they're external assaults that we have no control over. And they simultaneously hit us in the psyche, in the mind, and then in the organs area of the body. And that's what Dr. Hamer was able to um, recognize. And by using the CT scans, see which organ of the body, what area of the body that disease was located. So, many people take on a responsibility for their disease unrealistically, um, because that external assault is happening to us. It puts an entirely different concept to disease. And again, we need to know that, because to feel ashamed or responsible for something that's externally driven, and that's the old programming. If they can beat us down so that we no longer are empowered, then we lose our own joie de vivre. We lose our own spirit. So again, German New Medicine is just an empowering um, uh, um, awareness that Dr. Hamer brought to us, and that you are helping us understand further.
Mm. Yeah, well, yeah. I think another good way to approach health and life is to just think something pretty sensible, and that is that there's there's no real benefit in our bodies trying to kill us. Quite the opposite, right? Our bodies are going
Perfect.
to try and keep us alive, and um, that in itself is just a good place to start. If you get a diagnosis, okay, don't say, "Oh my God, my body's trying to kill me because I've got such and such." You say, well, why has my body done that? What am I not understanding or knowing about this? That my ignorance, how is my conscious, my psychological ignorance? What have I got to learn to understand what my body's doing and then to help it? Because that's at the end of the day, that's what we do. We just help our bodies to resolve the issues which are causing the symptoms which are we seek to recover from. So it's a paradigm shift, um, and it's such a wonderful shift because it can shift us out of fear. And that's fear is probably one of the biggest dangers that we face with can do with our health.
Well, and I agree with you. And it is it is what can cause um, an external shock to even be attracted to that vibration that we have in our body.
Mhm.
To stay out of fear is really important. And the last time in the world that we need fear is when we are expressing a symptom. Robert, we're nearing the end of part one, and then we'll
Mhm.
go into diseases and how you work with your clients in part two. But do you
Mhm.
have maybe something that you wanted to say in conclusion in part one?
Well, that learning GNM or GNM is free. You can learn it without spending money. You don't need to go to fancy university. You can go to learninggnm.com. Um, there's another website, free-new-medicine.com as well. So these are resources which are free for everyone, and it's interesting. And my advice is learn it while you are healthy.
Very fine. Okay, I'll see you shortly.
I'll see you shortly.
Thank you.